I have thought long and hard, to use a trite phrase, about choosing a few of the many examples of my activities and happenings during my 42-year stay here at CCSU, which illustrate and explain some of what I have done and learned. Here then are a few. When I first came to Central, the controversy about the Vietnam War was raging throughout American society, and I had already involved myself in protests. There are two incidents that I shall cite that briefly illustrate what was happening at Central Connecticut State College in regard to this conflict. During my first year on campus, a controversy arose here within the context of the debate on Vietnam. That controversy was whether or not ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, should be maintained by Central Connecticut State College. A debate on campus was scheduled. George Miller, then from the math department, whom some of you remember, and John Herbst from geography, they came dressed to speak at that debate. They came dressed in their full military reserve regalia, and they spoke in favor of ROTC from the soapbox, which was in front of the Student Center. I, not dressed in military regalia, spoke from the soapbox against maintaining ROTC. George Miller was so upset by my remarks that for a lengthy period of time after the event, as reported to me by Buddy Ain't, who was then a member of the history department and who played basketball with George every day, George Miller kept asking Buddy how he could possibly exist in a department with that Mezvinsky person. Of course, during the actual debate, George Miller and I were both cordial to one another, regardless of our disagreement. Later, George and I became friends, and he often joked with me about what he had told Buddy Ain't. This open debate on campus on an important issue and the cordiality between the advocates at the time of the debate revealed to me, and I think to others, that this was a true academic environment. In 1969, not very long, close to the first incident, a group of SDS, Students for a Democratic Society on campus, were not allowed to associate or organize on campus. These students took the case to the Supreme Court of the United States and ultimately won their point. I and some other faculty backed their position on the issue, and we involved ourselves in their fight. What these students did and how they persevered said a great deal about this campus at the time. In 1972, to cite my next example, Uri Davis, an Israeli Jewish anti-Zionist political activist who was then working on his PhD degree in the United States, and I, arranged to bring Fawzi El-Azmar, an Israeli Palestinian citizen who was house detained by the Israeli government at the time for writing occupation poetry. We brought him to the United States. The Israeli government didn't care about that. We brought him on a speaking tour. That is how we got him out of house detention. Fawzi, fluent in Arabic and Hebrew, hardly spoke English, but we translated for him, and he went on a lecture tour. Now, Fawzi had never been able to attend a university in Israel, even though he was already a poet. So I told him that I thought we could arrange for him to be enrolled at Central Connecticut State College. It was much easier to do that in the early 1970s. I said he'd have to take an English course first, which he did, and so he enrolled at Central Connecticut State College. And, in fact, he was penniless. He didn't have anything. He was very proud, and I knew I couldn't say to him, Fawzi, don't worry about the rent or the food. I'll buy it, because he just wouldn't do that. So I said, you know, Fawzi, I need to have a place to stay very near the college. And so let's rent an apartment together, and so we did, and so on and so forth. And he finished 4 years in 3. He graduated as an honor student. He went on to England and got his Ph.D., and he has since become an outstanding journalist in the Arab world. He's become an American citizen. He lives in Bethesda. He writes on Israeli-Palestinian and Israeli-Palestinian-American affairs. Now, let me tell you just one little story about him that I've told many times, but I have to tell it again. We lived together for 3 years. And after about a year that we were living together, my father in Ames, Iowa, knew I was living with a Palestinian. He was a little worried about that. So he came to New Britain to visit, and we took him out to dinner. Hard to find a place to take my father out to dinner. He was strictly kosher, and we had to make sure that whatever he ate was just in glass dishes, and so we found a place. So we went to dinner, and I made sure that Fauzi sat next to my father. And through dinner, they talked. Then after dinner, I drove Fauzi back to the apartment, and I drove my father to the motel where he was staying. He was in the front seat, and while I was driving him, he leaned over and he said, "Are you sure Fauzi's not Jewish?" Now, let me tell you that as much as I like that story, Fauzi likes that story even more. Now, in the fall of 1975, after the civil war in Lebanon had exploded, I began for a while, some months, to go back and forth to Beirut every second week or so on what was for me a political assignment. During my trips to Beirut, I met Yassar Arafat, the chairman of the PLO. The PLO was then in Beirut, and I put the idea to him of having a Palestine information office in Washington. The PLO was then on the terrorist list of the United States government. Arafat sent 2 people, Sabri Juriyis and Issam Satawi. I'm not going to tell you the passports that they had when they came into the country, but anyway, he sent them over, and they got into the country, and they were to work with me on getting this done, getting the office. Central Connecticut State College in New Britain was our central work and planning place. Now, President Miller, I read your memo the other day about partisan political activity, and you shouldn't do any of that on campus, and I don't know whether this would be so classified, but anyway, it was in 1975, and the statute of limitations has probably run its course. But anyway, this was our central workplace, and we would go back and forth to Washington. Now, we did this successfully. Mainly we did it successfully because Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State, and Alfred Atherton, the Assistant Secretary of State for Middle East Affairs, they wanted this done. Well, as I said, we were successful, and I think this is the only time that an organization or group or whatever you wanted to call the PLO at the time, that was on the terrorist list of the United States government, was ever able to be registered with the Justice Department and the State Department to have an information office, and since that time, that's been the Palestinian office in Washington, and well, as I said, sort of the launching pad for this was Central Connecticut State College. Now, let me tell you just one other thing about my trips back and forth. I went back and forth to Lebanon, and we never knew for sure in those days whether the airport would remain open. The Civil War was ongoing. However, as I think, well, you know, Raymond, that Middle East Airlines wanted to keep that airport open. So what I would do, I taught then on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I would leave Thursday at night, and I'd get in Friday, and I would usually see Yassar Arafat Friday night or Saturday, and then I'd get back to the airport quickly so I could get out of town in case they closed the airport. Now, I had a class Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. My friend Buddy Yank, whom I already mentioned, was in the history department, and Buddy Yank and I had a deal. The deal was he was always there Tuesday morning, and you never knew for sure. We didn't have email then. You know, sometimes the telephones wouldn't work. And so our deal was that Buddy would be there Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., and if I didn't show up Tuesday morning, he would go into my class and say that I hadn't returned. It was no secret I was going back and forth to Beirut, because you really couldn't keep that kind of thing a secret. So my class knew, and listen, that class, everyone was always there on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock because they wanted to see if I came back. And someday, when I write this up in an article, I've got the perfect title for that article. And the title is, I